And I remember I've actually had 3 programs in the Gujarati temple just up the road. Yes, 3 times. We had programs there, and I was present, and a very nice reception there. And here we are, we're in the Tamil temple. I don't know if there are any Tamil speakers here. If there are, I will speak to you a little in Tamil, because I can actually speak a little Tamil. I mean a little, but something. And a little Gujarati, if you're Gujaratis, Kemcho. And very nice. Tame Gujarati bolo cho. My Gujarati is not good, but it's not non-existent. So anyway, I will read a verse or even a couple of verses or 2 or 3 or something like that from Bhagavad Gita. Right at the end of Bhagavad Gita. Yes, just a sec. Right, here we are. First of all, though, please repeat after me. After me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Well, first of all, the subject that I'm going to address is in simple terms, you could say, what is the message of Bhagavad Gita? Because there are many people who certainly know what is Bhagavad Gita, basically, and may know a few verses, but they're not clear on what is really the message, what is Lord Krishna trying to convey to Arjuna, first of all, and then via Arjuna to us. Right, so, and the confusion arises because in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna addresses a number of subjects, quite a number, actually. And some people, or not just some, but many, they don't clearly, it's not clear to them that even though Lord Krishna speaks about different types of yoga, for example, Ashtanga yoga, Karma yoga, and a yoga called Shat Chakra Kriya yoga, and others. But Krishna is not just sort of talking about different types of yogas, and then he talks about different types of sacrifices to different people, and various other things. There's a number of subjects which Lord Krishna, at least you could say, touches upon. in Bhagavad Gita. And so many people have this idea that Krishna in Bhagavad Gita is simply presenting a number of options that if you could do this, or you could do that, or you could do something else, or you could do another thing, or even another other thing. So the way Prabhupada put it was that these people feel that Bhagavad Gita is something like a box of assorted chocolates. That's the way he put it, because he was speaking to an international audience. We could, seeing we're speaking to more of an Indian-based or Hindu background audience, we could say, just sort of rephrase that. Instead of a box of assorted chocolates, we could say a box of assorted Diwali sweets. How does that sound? A box of assorted Diwali sweets. You know what it's like at Diwali time. And maybe you've even been in India at Diwali time and seen the sweet shops. Oh, it's quite something. Many varieties, which some of which we may not be familiar with. Like, have you heard of, well, you've all heard of Rasgulla, I think. Although it's Bengali in origin, and I don't think any of you are Bengalis here, but still you've heard of Rasgulla, I imagine. Here's another Bengali sweet, which is a favorite of mine, I must admit. It is called chum chum. Are you familiar with chum chum? If not, I can tell you, you have wasted at least 10% of your life, because chum chum is truly exceptional. At least good chum chum. It's not easy to make, but if, there's a version called Malai chum chum, which is cut down the middle and filled with cream. And I must say, anyway, if you ever come to India with me, I will introduce you. Anyway, right, so if we say a box of assorted Diwali sweets, then someone surely will prefer the burfi. Someone must. Someone else may not so much like, especially like the burfi, but they more like the laddu. Or maybe, if you're familiar with the lagdu, what you get at Tirupati if you go there. Yes. And others, they may prefer are you familiar with the Mysore pak? It's something like, it's a relative, like a cousin of the basic laddu. And then there's of course there's sandesh, which again is Bengali, but generally people around the world, at least Indian people, they're familiar with sandesh. And Gujaratis are generally very fond of jalebi. And again, a good jalebi, hot, a good hot jalebi. Anyway, so like this, different people will choose. If there's a box of assorted Diwali sweets, different people, probably from here, some of you will choose this, some that, and some something else. But it doesn't really mean, like if you choose the burfi and maybe your husband chooses the laddu, what does it mean? Well, what it does not mean is that the laddu is necessarily better than the whatever it was, than the burfi. It's just a question of a person's taste. That's all. Simple thing. It's just a question of a person's taste. So like this, Srila Prabhupada made this point that because Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita is presenting, not just several, it's more than several, it's more than 10. It's a fairly substantial number of different processes. Therefore, and he, at least people are not so aware that he is actually, particularly at the end, because when you get to the end of any book, that's where everything is summed up and a conclusion is drawn. Even if it's just a novel, or, how about if it's a Bollywood movie? I'm sure you're, veterans of many Bollywood movies. And the usual sort of theme is that boy meets girl or girl meets boy, and they both think that the other one is just fantastic. But usually the girl's parents, or sometimes the boy's parents, they object. Are you familiar with such a sort of scheme of things? And so boy and girl, they're struggling. Oh, they really want to get together and get married, but there is this obstacle in the form of one group of parents, or maybe both. But you know what happens at the end, don't you? Those parents eventually give in, and the young fellow and the young girl, they get married. And you know what they say, at least in the fairy tales, they all lived happily ever after. Whether they really live happily ever after, anyway, that may be another movie actually. But that's usually the idea, happy days. So I hope I'm not offending Bollywood movies. Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, or, Shahrukh Bhai and company. Right, so how did I get off on that tangent? Anyway, excuse me for that. But this is the idea, at least in terms of Bhagavad Gita, that people, because many people know that there is a book called Bhagavad Gita. I mean, many Hindu people particularly, and many other people also. Bhagavad Gita is known around the world. It's not just amongst Hindu people, although much more amongst Hindu people. And the thing is, they're not clear. Even though they know of it, many of them have a copy at home. Some of them have read part of it. Some of them, not so many in my experience, have actually read the whole book. But Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is, you could say, a highly intellectual person. So his presentation is, you really have to think about it. It's not just, you just understand it just like that, like 2 + 2 = 4. It's not so easy. So as a result, many of these people who are aware of Bhagavad Gita, even who may have actually read it from cover to cover, but many of them are not clear on what Krishna, the author or the speaker, is truly trying to get at. What is his message to us? In fact, some years ago, quite a few years ago, in fact, I was doing, and I still do, many programs in Durban, around Durban, all around Durban. And there was a period, it was maybe for a year or so, going back, again, maybe 20 years or 15 years at least, when I would speak something about Bhagavad Gita to a crowd of people, but then I would ask at the end, who has read Bhagavad Gita? And these were all Hindu people, or at least 90-something% were Hindu people. So I would ask, how many of you have read Bhagavad Gita? And a few, and I would make it clear, like the whole book. A few would put their hands up, not many. So then after I would speak with those few people who had said that they have actually read Bhagavad Gita, and I would ask, what did you learn? When you finished Bhagavad Gita, what seemed to you to be Krishna's message? What was he trying to convey to you? And I got quite a number of different types of answers. One answer which I got from a few people, I probably asked between 20 and 30 people over maybe a year. So the main thing that I was told by a few of those people that they felt was the message was that Krishna is saying that you can just do what you like. He's presented many alternatives, and you choose as you like. In fact, there was one Gujarati gentleman who Prabhupada spoke to, and I heard a recording of that. And this gentleman in India, like a Gujarati, in other words, resident in Gujarat, he said to Srila Prabhupada, he said, Swamiji, I am liking Bhagavad Gita too much. This is a sort of a Gujarati idiom in my experience. I'm liking something too much. So he said, yes, I am liking Bhagavad Gita too much. And he said, and particularly the place where Krishna says towards the end that now I've told you all these things, now you can do whatever you like. Just go for it. Just choose what you like and do it. So a number of people, they said like that they concluded, having read Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna is just offering you different options, religious, spiritual, and you just choose what you like, whatever appeals to you, whatever seems best to you. Others said that, and quite a few said, yes, I read Bhagavad Gita, and my conclusion was there are many gods. Some others said, I read Bhagavad Gita, and I concluded we are all God. Others said, and it may sound like I'm being cheeky, facetious, I learned, but actually one fellow told me, my conclusion was, my mother-in-law is God. And I'm not joking. He actually said that. But then he explained that because she is his mother-in-law, he has to do what she says. Otherwise, he's in trouble. I mean, those of you who are married, you know the politics surrounding mothers-in-law. Mothers-in-law, some of you may be, and mothers-in-law, anyway, let's not get into it too much, but they have a bit of a reputation for being strong ladies. Right, and plus, one other response I got was at least one, maybe two people, maybe just one, said, yes, I read Bhagavad Gita and my conclusion was there is no God. Now, I'm serious. I'm telling you what actually happened. This is fact. This is not just me telling a story. In other words, well, at the least, they have not, even if they think there is a specific message, but they haven't understood what it is. But Krishna has given a very specific message in Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita, of course, Bhagavad means of God. It is what we call grammatically the genitive form of God. And Gita means song. So Bhagavad Gita is the song of God. And, well, like I mentioned, every story, that's where I got into the Bollywood movies, because in so many of them, there's this whole story of boy and girl, and then obstacle comes between boy and girl, but then they overcome the obstacle, and then they get married. And then, it's just a happy conclusion, or it's meant to be. Right. So Bhagavad Gita, like any movie that you see, be it Indian or from wherever, basically every movie comes to a conclusion. And in most cases, it's a happy conclusion. After difficulty comes a happy conclusion. So this is common in films. It's common like in novels, books which are stories, that there different things happen, but then there's a happy ending. So Bhagavad Gita is basically like that. Just like Ramayana. You all know, I'm sure, a few weeks ago, whatever, a month ago, something, was Ram Navami. And you know, I don't need to tell you the story of the Ramayana. You know that Lord Ram, things were going well, but then suddenly a great difficulty arose. He was exiled. And then that was, as if that was not enough, when he was in exile, his wife was kidnapped. Right? You know that story as well as me, or better than me. But then he rescued his wife, and then he came home, and the whole exile was finished, and then he became king, and so it was a happy ending. You're with me, right? This is Ramayana. Or Mahabharata. I'm sure you're all at least somewhat familiar with Mahabharata. The story of the Pandavas. I mean, it's the story of Krishna, but more specifically, the story of the Pandava brothers, Arjuna, Yudhisthira, Bhima, and so on. And they were also basically exiled. They had some big challenges. Then came the battle, and even though it seemed that their army was much smaller and the opposition's army was much bigger, so what chance did they have? But because Krishna was on their side, even though he didn't fight, they won. And then Yudhisthira becomes the king, and then it sort of concludes like that. And it's a happy ending. You know what I mean? You're familiar with these things, I imagine. Because this is how literatures work, generally speaking. This is how it all works. So Bhagavad Gita is structured similarly. In the beginning, there's difficulty. Arjuna is confused. Krishna tries to convince him in this way and that way and different ways, and he presents different processes, as he goes on. Eventually, Arjuna is convinced, specifically in chapter 10. He's basically convinced. And then at the end of Bhagavad Gita, there's sort of a happy ending, so to speak. I mean, at least Krishna in the last verses of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna concludes. He gives a conclusion. And it's very specific, but somehow most people who have read Bhagavad Gita, they miss it. They don't really get it. In fact, one thing Prabhupada said was that Krishna consciousness in general, and Bhagavad Gita particularly, these things are so simple that you may miss them. They're so simple, you may miss them. So now what I'm going to do, this is the idea I want to present. And now, as I said, I'll read a few verses here. And I hope, and I think that you will get the message of what is the message of Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita is an educational book. It's not a storybook. It is an educational book. And of course, educational books, like if you're learning a language, then you start on a simple level of the language, and then gradually, step by step, by the time you get to the end of the book about the language, now you become familiar with more complex and sophisticated parts of the language. Like, I used to go to Russia. In fact, from 1993 till January or February of 2020, when COVID began, I used to go to Russia every year for about 4 months. So I can speak Russian, not like a Russian, but I could give a class here in Russian, actually, if you want. But when I was right in the early stages, I was walking along in some shopping center somewhere in Russia, and I saw a book called Learn Russian in 30 Days. And I thought, that's what I need. 30 days, and I'll know Russian. So I bought the book. And I really got into it. But I can tell you, you cannot learn Russian in 30 days. You cannot learn any language or practically anything in 30 days. Yes. So here we go, a few verses. And we are now in the last chapter of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, where Lord Krishna is summing up, and he is repeating a number of things, like very important points that he had presented before in the earlier chapters. He's repeating them, clarifying. And I'm going to start with verse 62. There are 78 verses in this last chapter. So this is verse 62. There's just 16 or 17 verses to go out of 700, because Bhagavad Gita is exactly 700 verses. So the first one, 72. I'll read the Sanskrit of this one. The others I'll just probably read the English. Tam eva sharanam gacha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim stanam prapsyasi shashvatam. O scion of Bharata means, O Arjuna. Krishna is speaking to Arjuna. O Arjuna, surrender unto the Supreme Lord utterly. By his grace, you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. And verse 63, the next verse, Iti te jnanam akyatam guyad guyataram maya vimrishai tad asheshena yatechasi tatakuru. Thus I have explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully, and then do what you wish to do. You remember, I spoke about the man who met Prabhupada and told Prabhupada that, I like Bhagavad Gita too much, which is a lot. It's really a lot to like anything too much. And he said he particularly likes this verse where Krishna says, now I've spoken everything to you, now you just do whatever you like. It's not that Krishna exactly means that, because he has convinced Arjuna already back in the 10th chapter. But still, Krishna, not wanting to be sort of too forceful, he's saying something a little apparently flexible. So he said, now I've explained something to you more confidential than what I had spoken before, earlier in Bhagavad Gita. Now verse 64. Sarva guyatamam bhuya shrinu me paramam vacha ishtosi me dridham iti tato vaksyami te hitam. Because you are my very dear friend, I am speaking to you my supreme instruction, the most confidential knowledge of all. Hear it from me, hear this from me, for it is for your benefit. Yeah, he's saying, the Sanskrit, Shrinu me paramam vacha. Shrinu means listen in Sanskrit. Me means to me. Listen to me. Paramam vacha. Paramam means supreme, and vacha means words. I am now, listen to my supreme words, which I'm going to tell you right now. In other words, this is the actual conclusion. This is the point Krishna is trying to get across. And the next verse is 65, which is very famous. I think some of you at least would have heard it before. You may know this verse. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosi me. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this, because you are my very dear friend. This is the conclusion, or part of the conclusion. The next verse, 66, is the second part of the conclusion. And it's a famous verse, I'm sure. So many of you at least have heard this verse. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. So between this verse and the immediate previous verse, this is Krishna's conclusion. This is Krishna's message. This is what Krishna is trying to educate the readers in. It's a very important point. Very important point. Yes, and he's even made it clear that this is my supreme instruction. These are my supreme words. And, an interesting it's just a very slightly technical point, or it might be seen as such. In the last verse I just read, 66, famous verse, Sarva Dharman Parityaja, abandon all varieties of religion, and Mam Ekam, this word ek, which means one in Hindi, and I think in Gujarati, one is ek, is it? Yeah. Most North Indian languages, one is ek. In Sanskrit, one is ek. Yeah. Mam ekam sharanam. All of you Gujaratis, you would know. Sri Krishna sharanam mama. You're familiar with that little verse. Sri Krishna sharanam mama. That Sri Krishna, give me shelter, basically. Sharanam means shelter, like protection. So this is what Krishna is saying. Sarva dharma, parityaja. Prabhupada translates parityaja as abandon, because parityaja as a Sanskrit term, it's a very strong term. Like, if a ship is sinking, a boat is sinking in the ocean, then they may say, abandon ship. Basically means just jump off, just get out now. Yeah, don't sit down and have a cup of tea and think about it, but just get out now to save your life. Abandon ship. So this is parityaja. It's a very strong term of just give it up. Yeah, not just like, well, think about it, and then, if you prefer, you could sort of reduce how much you do it. It's very strong, parityaja, very strong. Sarva dharman. So what is Krishna saying? This is, for some people, it's a little difficult, or they just feel a little hurt even, you could say, because it's pretty simple Sanskrit. Sarva dharman means like if you say it in Hindi or maybe Gujarati, but I know in Hindi, sabdharma, that's normal everyday Hindi, means all dharma. In Sanskrit, sarva dharman parityaja. Just abandon all forms of religion. And mam ekam sharanam vraja. Sharanam mama. Just take shelter. Mam ekam, of me only. Yeah. So some people, they get a little upset when they hear this. But what Krishna is actually saying is that he is talking about the different things he presented before in the course of speaking Bhagavad Gita. All these different types of practices, different forms of yoga, different types of worship, different types of sacrifice. Yes, just stop doing them and just surrender to me. And, he's not saying that they are wrong. He's just saying this is better. Just like if one of you, yes, anyway, if one of you has a 100 rand note, or a 200 rand note, one of you has a 200 rand note, someone else has a 50 rand note, and the one who has the 200 rand note says, listen to me, give me your 50 rand note, I will give you my 200 rand note. What would you do? You'd probably hand over your 50 rand note quickly and take the 200 rand note. But that doesn't mean your 50 rand note is worthless. Of course it doesn't. It's a 50 rand note. It's valuable, but it's not as valuable. So Krishna, in presenting these other processes and now saying that, you don't follow them, but surrender to me, ekam, only. He's not saying that the other processes are just like useless and a waste of time. But the point is, they're not as valuable. Yeah, if you have an old, like the first car you had when you were young, when you got your first job, maybe an old Datsun, when they used to call them Datsuns, back in the old days. You've got an old Datsun and someone has a Rolls Royce and they say, hey, let's swap. I mean, unlikely though it would be. But the thing is, even though the Datsun does not compare favorably with the Rolls Royce, particularly a new one, but it's not like it's worthless. So this is the point, it's not condemning other Vedic processes. It's not condemning other Vedic processes. But it's just a question of relative worth. That's all. I hope that point's clear enough. And then, so surrender to Krishna. If we surrender to Krishna, because He is the supreme absolute truth, that is the supreme position. That's the highest position one can have. It's better than worshipping. I don't know if there's anyone from this temple here. Is that Madraveran out there? Anyone know? Is it Madraveran? Anyway, there's someone out there with a yellow cloth on, carrying a sword. I thought it might be Madraveran. Anyway, you get some of these people, like in India, even today, and particularly if you go back 50 years, there were many so-called incarnations, but they were not all incarnations. Some of them were just clever speakers who were trying to accumulate a following and accumulate some money. Unfortunately, so some people were taken advantage of. But what Krishna's talking about here is not that sort of thing, because he has been speaking about karma yoga, Ashtanga yoga. and other forms of yoga. And they're very sacred processes. And he's been talking about different forms of sacrifices, sacrifices to different deities. And they're all very elevated people, very, very elevated people. They're way above us. But even though they're very elevated people, Krishna is higher. That's what he says about himself. And that's what's there in the Vedic scriptures. So therefore Krishna, this is Krishna's conclusion, that I've explained so many truths to you. None of what Krishna has explained to Arjuna earlier in Bhagavad Gita is just some nonsense. They're all different types of truths. But here now, this is now the supreme absolute truth. So it's the highest truth. So we should adopt that. And we should surrender to Krishna. So this is some food for thought, particularly if you have some interest in Bhagavad Gita, or like sort of, different forms of religion, different forms of spiritual practice. This is all very important food for thought, to try to understand what Krishna is saying here. Because Krishna is saying in different places, he tells Arjuna, I am the supreme truth. I am the highest. And, generally if you meet someone and they say they're God, either they are or they're crazy, actually. If someone says they're God and they're not, it's ridiculous. It's just totally ridiculous. So either Krishna is God because he repeatedly says that, or he's crazy. But he's not crazy because so much of what he says makes very good sense. It's quite, it's a little sophisticated, but it's quite clear what he's saying, really, to thinking people. And he himself makes it very clear that he is the Supreme Lord and the supreme absolute truth. Let me just, as far as that goes, let me just refer to a couple of other verses. 10th chapter, just a little more food for thought. 10th chapter, verse 8. Aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate iti madva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvita. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Yes. I mean, it's pretty emphatic, isn't it? Yes, very emphatic. Chapter 10, here's verses 12 and 13 of chapter 10, because chapter 10 is where in Bhagavad Gita Arjuna becomes convinced. Yeah. The sort of Krishna trying to convince him that stops. And here Arjuna in chapter 10, verses 12 and 13, Arjuna says, Param Brahma, Param Dharma, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan, Purusham Shashvatam Divyam, Adidevam Ajam Vibhum. Ahustvam Rishaya Sarve Devarshir Naradastata. Asito Devalo Vyasa Swayam Chaiva Bravishime. Arjuna said, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. All the great sages, such as Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyas, confirm this truth about you. And now you yourself are declaring it to me. Anyway, Hare Krishna. Thank you for listening very patiently. Any comments, questions? Oh, I see. Okay. Just a sec. What now? Just this, yeah?
Yeah, just these two.
Ecto-10, okay. Okay, here's a practical question. How must we humans cope with all the wars, genocide that is happening in the world? And then a footnote, we're exposed so much through social media. Yes, well, I'm not just trying again to be sort of cheeky, but it's one good thing about being in South Africa. I mean, the crime rate and the corruption in South Africa. Anyway, let us pray to God. But those are downsides of being in South Africa. But there is one good side. We're a long way from Iran. We're a long way from America. We're a long way from Europe. We're a long way from Russia. We're even further away from China. And at least at this stage, that's good. Yeah. Not to be sort of hard-hearted about the people who are suffering. My gosh, isn't it unbelievable? Isn't it just totally unbelievable? That, without mentioning any names of people or groups of people, that certain groups of people are just killing thousands of, you could say, in a certain sense at least, innocent people. Innocent in the sense that they were not trying to kill the people who have now bombed them. They were not doing anything against the people who have now come along and started killing them. So they're innocent in that sense. So, I mean, at least it's beneficial. There are two places. One is South Africa, and the other is, and it may even be better, New Zealand. Out of the way, just out of the way. Anyway, who knows? Who knows how things may develop? Oh dear. You see, in their small ways, they are understanding that this world is a difficult place. Two of them. It's a chorus. And it may be just some small thing. Like once, I was flying from Joburg to Durban. I was on the plane, and it was back in the time when there was one airline, South African, they had red planes. Was it? Okay. So we were sitting in an SAA plane, it's a white plane, and the one-time red plane was next to us, and people are getting on. And in the seat, the row just in front of me, was a young mother, probably late 20s or something, with a little child. But little child was quite capable of speaking. So maybe little child is 3. And little boy is looking out the window at the red plane. And I'm sitting in the row behind by the window. And little boy says to Mummy, "Mummy, I want to go on the red plane." And Mummy says, we're going on this plane because that's going somewhere else. And little boy says, but Mummy, I want to go on the red plane. And Mummy says, okay, look, next time I'll take you on the red plane, but, all right. But within about a minute, little boy was traumatized. He was screaming, "I want to go on the red plane." What a thing to get traumatized about. Little children. All right, that's a diversion. But, as it stands, it's one of the few, really good things about being in South Africa. We're sort of out of the way. Mr. Putin is apparently saying he may attack England or France. So if you're up in that part of the world, who knows what's going to happen, because these people are just bizarre. So yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? It's just a real shame. After the Second World War, and for Americans after Vietnam, and maybe the Korean War and Vietnam, it seemed like the whole world was calming down, and there was not going to be so much war. Maybe in Africa you get these revolutions and things, but in Europe, America, Russia, it looked like, we've learned our lessons and we are going to be peaceful now. Anyway, so much for that. Because these people, these leaders, like Mr. Trump, don't tell him I said this, and definitely don't tell Mr. Putin. Please, whatever you do, don't tell Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin has a sort of inferiority complex on a national scale. He wants to prove that Russia is really, big and powerful and worthy of respect and of being feared. So that's what he's trying to do. And Mr. Trump, in his own way, he's sort of the same. And, these are people These are people who are not peaceful. These are people who are not spiritually minded. These are people who they want more power and wealth and fame, and that's why it's all going on, basically. It's basically why it's all going on. And it's just a terrible shame, but that's all you can expect. It seemed like they were getting better, the politicians, but it was just on the surface. You scratch a little deeper, and there's still these aggressive, nasty people. Yeah, like the people who started the Second World War. So that's the world we live in. We have to face it. That is the reality. That the leaders particularly, they cannot control themselves, and they have these big material desires for being respected and, like that. How must we cope with it is the question. Well, I'll tell you, ultimately, the way that you, we, anyone, and really the only way that we can cope with this is by becoming Krishna conscious, becoming spiritually conscious, and going above these things. So we're not so much affected by all the tension and the anxiety. And so that at the end of this life, or at the latest at the end of the next life, but that might be too late, you never know. But particularly if possible, at the end of this life, we should return to the kingdom of God. That's what we need to do. Because there, they never have revolutions. There, Krishna is God. Everyone worships him. Everyone serves him. No one challenges him. If anyone challenges him, immediately, they fall down into this material world. Yeah. So how must we cope? We must cope by cultivating our spiritual consciousness, because spirit is above and beyond just the ordinary material consciousness and just anything ordinary and materialistic. So we have to cultivate particularly Krishna consciousness, and then we'll be able to cope with it. Even if they do come and take over South Africa, I mean, it wouldn't be too difficult if you don't. I don't want to offend the South African army, but I don't think it would be extremely difficult to take over South Africa. But even if they do that, somehow or other they come down through Africa and they invade South Africa. And believe me, it's not impossible. It's definitely not impossible. So, but if they do that, but if you are Krishna conscious, if you are really spiritually conscious, you will not be affected by it personally, in the sense of emotionally and like that. You'll be able to carry on with your spiritual life. Yes. So that's what we need to do. Otherwise, whoever asked the question said we're exposed to so much through social media. It's not just social media. It's the newspapers and, on television and, CNN and Fox News, all these news services. I used to, would you believe, I used to be a journalist before I became a Hare Krishna devotee. It's a fact. That was almost 60 years ago, actually. And on a big newspaper. And the newspapers, you know what they want to do? They want to make money. Surprise, surprise. That's actually what sort of all they want to do. And how to do it? Make the news as sensational as possible so that people will buy it. So therefore they will, sort of make a mountain out of a molehill, if you understand that idea. Something may not be so important, but they'll make it sound very important. So you'll buy the newspaper or subscribe, and they'll make money. So please, that's really what we need to do, and that's the only way we can really cope. So there ought to be a more simple way to explain and understand the Bhagavad Gita to the many ordinary people. Well, there are. Yeah, in fact, last night we were with a group of about 6 people, was it? I think 6 people. None of them were Indian or Hindu. There was I think 4 white ladies, was it? 1 colored gentleman, I think. And there was 1 African and the African lady. And they were very nice. And I explained Bhagavad Gita in very different terms to how I explained it here. The thing is, you already know a lot more than they know or know. Oh yeah. And therefore, it's possible to present things of a deeper nature. Yeah. Because Bhagavad Gita, it can be understood, you could say, in simple terms. But Bhagavad Gita is actually very deep. In fact, generally, for just ordinary people who have never been exposed to these things at all, generally, we don't recommend that if they're becoming a little interested in Krishna consciousness, generally we don't recommend that they start by reading Bhagavad Gita, because it's just too complicated unless you're experienced in these things. Generally, we would get them to read the book Science of Self-Realization, because it's much more general and simple. Yes. And I can tell you an interesting little point. When I was in England in the 70s, we were distributing books on a huge scale, on a massive scale, in the streets. And at the end of the books, there was a little page or a few pages that, write to us, contact us, come and visit us, communicate with us. And we would there was no computer, email and all that sort of thing. We would just get ordinary letters coming in every day. because we were distributing a few thousand books a day. And you know what we found? And we focused on one book at a time. Like for a couple of months, we'd be distributing Bhagavad Gita. Then a couple of months, Science of Self-Realization. Couple of months, something else. And you know what we found? When we were distributing Science of Self-Realization, we got about at least minimum 5 times the amount of mail coming in from people who are interested, they want to know more and they have questions and all that, than when we were focusing on distributing Bhagavad Gita. Not that I'm opposed to Bhagavad Gita at all, but you've got to be kind of ready for Bhagavad Gita. If you're not ready for it, you'll just get lost, because it's a bit complicated and sophisticated. So yeah, so for ordinary people, they should read a book like Science of Self-Realization, or what's the other one? The Journey of Self-Discovery. Those 2 books are very good for your average person who's walking in the street today in East London. I mean, they have to be thinking people, but you know, African, white, colored people who just, they don't know what Bhagavad Gita is. They never heard of it in so many cases. Give them one of those books. And if they're, you know, if they're a little thoughtful, a little interested in exploring things philosophically, these simpler books will actually help them much more initially than Bhagavad Gita. After they've read one of those books, then they can go on to Bhagavad Gita. But even then, we recommend, and we told these people last night, better that a seminar is organized chapter by chapter to go through Bhagavad Gita with explanations. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Anyway, thank you very much for listening very patiently. Sorry if I went on for too long. So, what's now? Kya ho raha hai?
Any other questions, maybe from the floor? We can have 1 or 2 more.
Oh, sure.
And then vote of thanks and prasad.
Okay.
So if there are any other questions you may have thought of, because the book has moved around, maybe you thought of a question after the book passed you, you could ask it now, or there's a follow-up from what Maharaj said. Please, you feel free to ask, and then we'll conclude from there. And there's prasadam still to be served as well. Anybody? Any follow-ups? Anything else you may have thought of? No. Okay, so